Hello, my name is Ross Broadstock from Britain's Hidden History, and today is April the 23rd, 2020, which I'm sure, as everybody knows, is St. George's Day. St. George, known as the patron saint of England. Now, it's a very strange patron saint, because the George it's supposed to be, the apparent St. George, seems nothing to do with England whatsoever. He's and if we look him up, we'll find there's very little known about St. George's life. There's a rumour or legend that he was some sort of Roman officer, and he was born Greek descent from Cappadocia. And the idea is that he was martyred in one of the persecutions. Beyond that, we don't really know much at all. And also, if you look it up on the internet, you'll find there are two main versions of the legend. There's a Greek and a Latin version, which can both be traced to the 5th or 6th century. Remember those dates, 5th or 6th century. The saint's veneration dates back to the 5th century with some certainty, and possibly still to the 4th. Notice the veneration dates back, so the people have written about him, but not actually him. And then there's the dragon legend, but that's the sort of medieval edition, I guess, generally accepted. Although that might have some echoes in some historical events as well. Now, the earliest historical texts is Greek hagiography, which you go back and you can read all about that. In the 5th century, and you got Eusebius, written in the 4th century, but no real detail, and doesn't even put his name in, so it might not even be him. If you look into the historical looking at it, look at things like the Bibliotheca Hagiographica Graecia. This says that George was amongst those saints, and in quotes, whose names are justly reverenced amongst men, but whose actions are known only to God. So I have no idea who he was or what he did. And if you look at the historical side of things, you can look in the Catholic Encyclopedia, Herbert Thurston, and you can see there and they try and date him and try and place him. But this is the most bizarre comment, and this is what you come up against with history all the time. This is a quote, okay? It says, although no faith can be placed in either details of his history or his alleged exploits, there is no grounds for doubting the historical evidence of St. George. So apart from not really knowing his name, what he did, or where he existed, there's no real reason to doubt him. Anyway, according to David Atwater, it says that no historical particulars of his life have survived. So it's more of a Middle Eastern thing, really, and you find he's venerated in the Muslim world as well. And this story, so why has this story been adopted to become the patron saint of England? What's behind that? Where did it come from? Well, let's think, actually, maybe, just maybe, you want to consider, maybe he wasn't the original St. George. What if you're in a situation whereby there was already a St. George in England, the country now known as England, and this St. George predated the sort of Anglo-Saxon narrative, and it was a British king being referred to? It creates a bit of a difficulty for you, for he's not part of your, you've got a national, patron saint's a quite new concept, but you've got this venerated saint who becomes your national figure, yet he's not even a Saxon or an Anglo or Germanic, he's actually British. So you've got a problem. The other problem, which is even more difficult or more important to overcome, is that by showing this saint existed before the Saxons, it shows that Britain was a Christian country before then. And if you follow through the British records of event, you look at people like Nennius, you will discover that a more likely route of St. George goes all the way back to the 1st century, not long after the crucifixion of Christ himself. So this goes right back, and this is looking at the stories of Joseph of Arimathea coming to Britain and the things he did when he was there. I'm going to do a full video on Joseph of Arimathea, and you see one of my other videos, you can see where the grave is already. That's in Cardiff. I know it all seems bizarre if you don't know any of this, but it's well recorded. If you go right the way back, this used to be part of the mainstream history. before it all got rewritten to become Saxon history a couple hundred years ago. So let's have a quick look. If you look, for example, something quoted where the Nennius story has been written in poetic verse by Edmund Spenser. He was around in the 16th century, and he wrote it as this: Joseph converted this King Artivargus by his preaching to know ye laws divine, and baptized him as right hath Nennius, the chronicler in Britain tongue full fine, and to Christ's lords made him incline, and gave him then a shield of silver white, a cross end long, and over thwart full perfect. These arms were used throughout all Britain, for a common sign, each man to know his nation, and thus is arms by Joseph creation. Full long afore St. George was generate, were worshipped here of middle elder date. So what we're looking at here, the most thing you should have picked up on, I'm sure you didn't miss it, is this white shield with a cross on it. And if you look at other sources, you can see that Nennius actually refers to it being red. So this famous symbol, which became the symbol of England and other countries such as Georgia, but we're talking specifically about Britain's history, predates the arrival of any Angles or Saxons, anything like that. It goes right back to 1st century, according to these versions, according to Nennius. There's the coat of arms presented to him. And why would he do this? Well, this was done in return for a grant of land. This ties into the stories then. Unfortunately, you've got another myth bolted on the top here, which is the myth of Glastonbury being the place where Artivargus went to. I should also explain, Artivargus is actually a title. That's not a name as such. So his name is Gwierydd, which is where apparently we get George from, George and the Welsh version there. So if we look then at what we're going to do is jump around slightly now, and we're going to look at what Artivargus gave to Joseph. He made him welcome. So I'm going to take a quote here. The first notable act of the king, Artivargus, was to bestow upon the 12 disciples of Joseph, that's Joseph of Arimathea, the Judean refugees came to Britain avoiding Christian persecution. So they were given 12 hides of land free of tax. In the Liber Syriaco, 1619 AD, it is stated that at Glastonbury itself, one hide of land equaled 160 acres and was deemed sufficient to maintain a man and his family. That's a lot of land, actually. Now, another video we'll do on is where the real Glastonbury, which is called Glastenic, which is actually up in Warwickshire. I'm going to show you some of the place names there. Place like Oldbury and that whole area, where you can see the connections. Now, one of the stories, which ties in with this, is that actually the place of Gloucester was even named in his honour. So we're talking about the West Country, really, and up to Warwickshire. That's the area. He's not actually a Welsh king as such. He's British, and they're all linked together. But it's actually the west of England, as we're talking about, or Britain. So, as I say there, so with this land grant, a document was furnished setting forth the legal aspect of the gift, which gave the recipients many British concessions, including right of citizenship and all the privileges accorded the Druidic hierarchy. Every Druid was entitled to one hide of land free of tax, freedom to pass unmolested from one district to another in time of war, and many other privileges. And then this grant of 12 hides of land tax-free is in the Domesday Book. This land has never paid tax. If you look at there, you can look it up for yourself. The gracious reception and protection accorded these first Christian missionaries by Artivargus, the king, continued his royal patronage until in 156 AD, his great-grandson, King Lucius, established, this is a formal basis of Christianity, as the national religion of Britain, and into which Levitical Druidism gradually merged. I actually see the connections between old Druidism and the British form of Christianity, which got later sort of, pushed out, overwritten by the Roman Christianity, which arrived with Augustine. As it says here, these facts exclude the claim of the Latin Church to that eminence, having been a foreign element in these lands, since its first introduction by the monk Augustine in 579 AD. There we are. I've got the Glastonbury thing there. And on the other side, the sister community was Caerleon on Usk. So, as Spenser says in his poetry, Artivargus was famed beyond his native shores, was never king more highly magnified, nor dread of Romans than was Artivargus. And you see him referred to in Roman satires. What is the matter with you? Have you seen the car-born British king Artivargus? With a car there, most likely being a chariot, of course. So there you have the situation with him. Oop, let's scroll through my notes here. And of course then, this idea of Joseph coming to Britain was again a part of the main history of the country up until the last couple of hundred years, when there's a sort of rewrite after the arrival of Hanoverians. And it's not new information, it's been well known for a long time. And as you have the old the song everyone's aware of, and did those feet in ancient time walk upon England's mountains green? And was the holy Lamb of God on England's pleasant pastures seen? And did the countenance divine shine forth upon our clouded hills? And was Jerusalem builded here amongst those dark satanic mills? Now, I'll jump to the end. Until I have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land. England in those days, perhaps more properly described as Lloegr, or Britain maybe. Not the modern England tend to think of. Now this kind of mysticism here from Blake, this harkens back to old memories of even possibly Jesus himself come to Britain, which again we'll be dealing with in another book and in more videos, but also the idea of Jerusalem being built here. That refers to the concept of Christianity coming to Britain first, long before it became adopted in Rome. So I can see why this is quite a controversial subject. So what you have then is a situation where the story of Artivargus or Gwierydd, you can follow that through. And I'll just quote now from page 100 of Trojan War, 650 BC, another little Easter egg or nugget. And you'll see how Alan Wilson and Blackett describe this. It has to be remembered that British history was preserved in southeast Wales, and that the arrival of Joseph of Arimathea, known as St. Illyd, in AD 37 is well traceable. This leads to the sites where he sets up places of worship, and most importantly, to the foundation on lands given to him by the British king named as King Gwierydd, who ruled the Midlands of present-day England. This powerful British king was known to the Romans as Artivargus, which might mean after the virago, Boudica perhaps. And Roman poet, it's definitely some sort of title. And Roman poets mocked Nero in his fear of Artivargus, King Gwierydd. One wrote how Caesar might be fortunate if Artivargus slipped from his chariot pole and broke his neck. It does not take a genius to recognise Gwierydd as George. And it was to this George Gwierydd that St. Illyd, Joseph of Arimathea, gave the white flag and the red cross upon it that is still the flag of England today. The idea that somehow Joseph gave this quintessentially English flag to a foreign reprobate out in Edessa around AD 400 is absurd. This is just another illustration of the desire to obliterate all ancient British history. George of Edessa is another gigantic red herring, deliberately designed to draw attention away from accurate and provable British history. The idea of Gwierydd giving lands to Joseph of Arimathea around AD 37, and that being the first major British Christian settlement, a mere 560 years before the Bishop of Rome sent Austin, later known as Augustine, to the immigrant Anglo-Saxons in 579 AD, is a huge embarrassment to certain parties. King Gwierydd was a British king, descended from the Brutus migration into Britain around 504 BC. As he was a king descended from the tribes of Israel, who migrated from regions north of Haran and Syria around 68 BC, and who crossed all the way through Asia Minor and arrived at the Dardanelles around 650 BC, Here they remained until the fleet sailed for Britain under Brutus in circa 504 BC. It is totally logical that King Gwierydd and Joseph of Arimathea should have had common ancestry, and it is equally logical that Gwierydd would have given a tract of land at Glastonbury in Warwickshire to this ancient kinsman. The land is at Arthurston, which is Arthur's Twyn, in Warwickshire, and there is a great ancient graveyard where multitudes of the illustrious of the British are buried. I have to say, it's a scandal that this place has not had any archaeology at all to look into these claims. It's a fabulous site. How many graves in that there is, it's incredible. Anyway, it's still known as Old Bury. Bit of a clue, the old burial place. Here is where Arthur I, who was the son of Magnus Maximus, and his first wife, the Queen Kindrech, was buried. The fake Glastonbury in Somerset has no great ancient burial mound full of large burial mounds, and the abbey was not founded until AD 940. That's 900 years after Joseph. And St Dunstan became the first abbot in 941. All this is detailed in the King Arthur conspiracy. And this place that matches with the place, name and site directions given in the works of Cradock at Llancarfon and Matthew of Westminster. British kings ruled England south of the Humber until 684 AD. Some records indicate 688. And then that refers back to the Sutton Hoo burial ship, which I'm going to do a follow-up video on. I hope you look out for that one. Got some great feedback from places like the Archaeology group on Facebook and other historical groups. Even those who disagree with me, it's great to hear it. I like to get the different views. And then I can go and research and find out for myself. And that's what it's all about. So if a lot of this information is new to you, I'll ask you to do the same thing. Take it on board. I think this has not just come from nowhere. It's not just been thrown together. Look into the information. Do some background of your own. And then see what you think. Is it more likely that St. George is named after a British king in the 1st century who was given the red cross and white background as known as the English flag in England, possibly by Joseph of Arimathea, as Nennius and the Welsh records say, and was recorded in the history until recently. Oh no, I have to mention, there's something else I want to mention. He's also the character that Shakespeare uses in one of his plays, and I'll pop that on the screen. Or is it some obscure character, really, from Central to Eastern Europe, who's venerated in the Muslim world, but hardly anything's known about? Not his life story, or even that he was called George, really. So we are. We just take it from a fresh start, without any preconceived ideas, and weigh up the two stories and the amount of evidence of both of them. Well, I know which way I would have been thinking about it. So, in the spirit of this, to end my greeting, I wish you all a very Dydd Gwyl Gwierydd Sant. Heddwch.